Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another tutorial, and in today's tutorial we're going to be looking at how to render our black skinned anime characters. So a lot of these, basically everything we're doing is the same as in our white character tutorial. It's just now everything's going to be with different colors and different shades, but the same rules are going to apply. It's going to be a very simple style of rendering. It'll be really good for any beginners out there or people who just kind of want a quick, easy, base sort of rendering method that they can practice with. It's pretty fast to do, it's easy to understand, and I am just challenging myself to just use sort of brushes that theoretically should just come with your art program. At least they do in Clip Studio Paint, but I would imagine in any other program they should have pretty similar brushes. So we really just want a very light airbrush. We want a softening eraser, so it's just, we don't want hard erasing, we want very soft, light erasing, so we can really just sort of manipulate light. And then we want a hard airbrush as well. That'll help us with hard lighting. And finally, I just use a G pen for hard cast shadows, and that just should be on anything. So either way, regardless, I'm just working on this layer right here, so the main portion of the body. We're going to add a layer and clip to layer below. From there, we'll make sure that we have selected our skin color, and we want to pick a color just below it and off to the right, so it has a little bit more depth of color in it. And then we want, on our red, blue, green value, come just a little bit towards the red, a little bit more. That'll make it look a little bit more like an actual shadow. It kind of warps the coloring of it just slightly, and it can add a little bit more pop to your characters rather than just kind of looking gray. So I am just going to take a super light airbrush here, rather large. We're going to kind of tighten everything up after, but on this initial shadow layer, we want to keep it pretty large. That way it sort of blends itself. If it's too small, then it doesn't blend well, and it'll look kind of jarring. So we want it to be rather large, and then we'll worry about blending it after. So I'm just basically trying to tag anything that is away from the light, and for all intents and purposes, the light is up here shining down on our character. So areas like the chest and parts of the belly, they're going to be more exposed to the light, whereas inner thigh and such will not. So we're just going to mess with the balance of it until it looks right. So I just made another layer, clip to below. I'm grabbing the skin color here from the head, and then we're going to use this to sort of beat back some of these shadows in areas that don't need it. So the upper chest, the shoulders, I'm going to use a smaller airbrush to get little parts of the belly, not a ton of the belly though. I'm going to get some light on this hip here, as well as then a large bit of light here on this thigh since it's coming forward towards us, and then same with the outer area on this thigh. Then we can come to a very small sort of detail-oriented light brush and very gently sketch in some light here, like on the neck tendons and the collar, like so. So now we can see we've got some areas that are a little bit brighter. However, I will use our eraser brush to make sure that my lighting doesn't come too deep on the chest here, as well as here in sort of the crotch area and this hip. There. So from there, we can add a little bit harsher light. So again, I'm going to be bringing up towards the white and gray portion of my color drop tool over here. I'm going to come up towards the yellow just a little bit so it's a brighter looking light. We don't want it to be a shadow now. And so this is where basically the light's actually going to be touching our character. And again, we don't want to overwork the light here. We don't want this to be jarring. Oops. I don't want this to be jarring. So I'm just gonna put that there. Keep this all one thing. There we go. I'm gonna use kind of a smaller brush here, just so I can capture certain parts of the stomach. And then you can use a larger brush here on the thigh, like so. And then I always like just flicking on and off the visibility of the layer we're working on, because again, we're working with such light colors that sometimes it can be difficult to fully make out what is going on. And so I'm just constantly trying to look and rebalance anything. So I don't want this character to be too bright looking. We do want to keep them dark, but light will still be shining on their skin. So we want to capture and make brighter the areas that are closest to the light. And then I'm going to add a little bit of highlight here to the collar and neck again, like so. There. Now from there, I really like just adding in the cast shadows after that. It kind of helps me figure out better where like our hard lighting is going to be. So I guess in the last one we kept the cast shadows really, really small. So you can certainly still do that. Like if your character's just outside in the sun, then they're not going to have a ton of shadows on them. Certainly not when they're being drowned out by sunlight. But for this one, we'll bring the shadows and make them a little bit larger, just so you can kind of practice a little bit more with an exaggerated shadow. Also do a good job at showing you kind of how to blend it a little bit better. So I might even clip up right here, this little section here on the neck with the tendons. I'll even exaggerate the collarbone here. I'm just going to use my paint bucket tool. Like so, and I'm just using a G pen for all of this, by the way. We can grab all of this. Oops. Shadow the bottoms of our fingers here. I will paint bucket those, and then make sure that any non-shaded bit here is covered. Sometimes the paint bucket tool doesn't like to capture everything, which is annoying, but it is what it is. Then we'll make this shadow on our chest here a little bit bigger than it was in our other tutorial. Connect that for now. I'll just bring this up here. Connect this lower, right there. I'll bring this shadow up into the nook of the elbow there. Then I'll add a large shadow here, except where it kind of pudges out right there. Same with right here. Then I'll add a larger cast shadow right here in between our legs. So I'll put this there, just fill these in. And again, if you don't want to use quite as much shadow, that's perfectly fine. It just basically depends on where your character is situated. So if they are in a super bright area, they don't really need as much shadow. But if they're also having a bright light cast down on them and they've got some sort of shading or whatnot to help block out the sun, then you can really play and mess around with the shading itself. I'm gonna fill that in. And there we go. So, from there, I'm going to come back to my little eraser and just gently soften some of these shadows, because they don't need to be ultra dark here, especially the areas closest to the light, okay? So we're going to do that. From there, underneath my multiply layer, I'm going to make a new layer for very bright lighting. So again, we're coming up towards the white area on our color selector. I like to use a hard brush for the hard lighting just because it is blended a little bit. It gives it a little more texture to feel. And we just want to brighten the areas where our lighting is most intense. So portions of the shoulder here, portions of the chest, basically just outlining them for right now. We can add little sunspots here on the collar, and we're going to soften these up quite a bit too. So right now, just worry about putting them in. And of course, if you don't want to add sort of light streaks on your character, that's perfectly fine. Not everybody does, but I like doing it just as a highlighter. Then we'll use a slightly bigger tool here. Get this thigh. And then I'm just going to soften them a ton. And in later tutorials, I do want to look at more like harsh lighting and shading, just because there's a couple of brushes that I've worked on or I found from other creators out there who are sharing their brushes and whatnot that can really make nice texture, bright, popping light. And so we'll look at those later, but for right now, I'm just trying to make a beginner tutorial that can be used from the get-go. You don't have to make any fancy brushes or anything like that. You don't need to really know what you're doing there. You just can use whatever brushes they give you in your art program, and you should be able to do this style method. It's just a simple anime rendering. So from there, after we've softened up those hard lights, you can even lower the opacity here. I think I will to 85, maybe even a bit more. So I don't want them super visible, so I'm going to lower it to 60. That looks a lot better. And then I'm going to actually specifically soften this belly portion here. It got away from me there. And now we will do the face and this arm. So again, I'm just going to come up to our darkest portion there. This arm is back behind us, and this character has a bit larger cast shadows than before, so we can kind of make this arm a bit darker. Again, I'm just using a larger airbrush here. It helps to blend it a little bit nicer. Then I can come up and grab the actual skin here, kind of soften and tighten everything up. It's like the top of this ear doesn't need to be super shaded. Then take our large brush, kind of catch the outside of this arm. From there, we will select our brighter spot, so we can always check by selecting our little face here. So this all right here is the actual skin color. Then you can find portions like on the belly and see like, okay, that got brighter. You can kind of go from there. I'm just going to kind of brighten this up just a little bit more though. Then I'm going to add a little tiny bit of lighting to this arm out here. Use a large brush just to capture the head there, along with a little bit on the nose and ear. And in our face tutorials, when I eventually get to those, we'll actually do a little bit more detail and effort on the head, but for right now, we're just going to keep it very simple. From there, we can add in our shadow. So I'll just grab the dark portion here. Again, I'm keeping this character with a bit harder, larger shadows, just to kind of change it up a little bit from our previous character. Just like that. I'll soften that up. Then just some simple shading here on the head, nothing fancy. This time I'll even add a little bit of shadow here on our ear though. Like this. A from there, I will just select the layer beneath my multiply layer, grab the skin color, come up to our very soft brush. I'm gonna use kind of a large brush, probably 400. Then I'm gonna come over here and get kind of a darker red. So we're gonna do the blush, and on our darker character, we want to keep the red itself a little bit darker. If it's too bright, then it really brightens it up and makes it look glowy, which we don't want. So we want to keep it a little dark, just so it kind of breaks it up the color here a little bit. Probably a little bit brighter than that. So just kind of play around and mess with it until you find a color you like. Then from there, just add in the shadow. I'll use my eraser brush to kind of keep it gentle. I don't want the blush on this character to pop too much, so I'm keeping it relatively low in opacity here. And then I come up to my hard shadow. I don't even change the color of these lines. I just pick a little tiny line and just gently scratch in these little blush lines. So you can see if I zoom way in. Just lower the opacity of those a little bit. So then when you zoom out, like, it might be tough if you're watching this on a phone to fully see everything, but we basically just want really light, slight color changes. Of course, if your character just got done running or working out, then you can make the blush a lot more intense. You can also, as you go, you can add blush in other areas too. Like, you could add a little bit of pinkness in certain parts of the body, like maybe around the chest and the stomach and areas, but for the time being, this is just a super simple, anime rendering tutorial. We'll look at clothes later, and we can look at different shading and rendering styles, but for right now, if you're a beginner, this is a really solid place to start. You can build upon it as you go with more color layers and a little more depth. You can even add texture to the skin, but for right now, this is just a really good base if you're just trying to get into drawing anime style art in the first place. So hopefully you found this helpful. Let me know if you did. Let me know anything you'd like to see in the future, or what types of shading and lighting you would like to see. And I'll see you in the next one. See ya.